Thanks for coming back. My name is Patrick McMullen. I work for ScitoVation. We're a small chemical safety research company in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. I wanted to start with a total overgeneralization, and this is where I see we are, and this maybe is a little bit unfair to some of the speakers yesterday, but from an organizational standpoint, yesterday was largely about setting the stage, letting us come together in terms of identifying a lexicon so we could be a little bit more conversant about how things are applied. Not to say that we didn't touch on a lot of applications yesterday, but definitely today is where we're really going to kind of dig in and have the conversations we need to have about how the tools that we discussed yesterday could be applied in different situations. So I have the liberty of basically doing a quick recap as I saw it, and I mean, again, complete oversimplification, but I think that we could distill yesterday into a pretty short number of critical themes. And the first sessions, the first grouping of talks yesterday did a great job of setting up this. I'm not sure dichotomy is the right word, but this tension between conventional statistical modeling and AI and machine learning based modeling. So the stochastic versus algorithmic, or inferential versus predictive. We've defined it a couple different ways, but what has left me kind of curious is how those differences in the philosophy of how those approaches treat problems is going to dictate how we use them in practice. So I know that came up a couple times yesterday, and I'm sure it'll be an ongoing theme today. Another thing that several speakers touched on was the need to be very direct about what we can and can't do with these technologies. From kind of a nuts and bolts perspective, you could define a domain of applicability, and there were a couple talks, and Tom was very explicit about what happens when you try to do everything with all the data versus, close down your approach a little bit, just tackle the data that you're very sure about, and all of a sudden you can be much more predictive. So I think that this is a message that we need to figure out how to communicate those trade-offs versus of volume versus accuracy as we apply these technologies, and then also taking care not to overpromise. And I know that I was very struck by this concept of the hype landscape. I can't remember exactly what we were calling it, but the idea that maybe we are currently at the peak of overexcitability, irrational exuberance, and what we are potentially looking forward to is this trough of disappointment before we can kind of rebound and really find a plateau of productivity. And one of the roles I see of this workshop is figuring out how we can build a bridge over that trough, right? So we're excited about AI. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. How do we make sure that we're communicating things to the broader community in a way that we don't crash? And I'd say almost every talk yesterday had some conversation about uncertainty and also about transparency. And I think this is a critical piece that's not in chemical safety and risk assessment isn't unique to the application of these tools. Same conversations are going on with the use of a lot of other technologies and data. but being that they are a little bit more abstract and harder to put your hands on than kind of screening level data, we need to make sure that we are confident in understanding kind of what we can and can't do and how to communicate that uncertainty and being transparent about kind of what are the inputs, what are driving the models. So that's my view of what we saw yesterday. Moving on today, I think we have a kind of a handful of outstanding questions, and this is by no means exhaustive. But we talked a little bit yesterday about how we take the super users, the people that are excited enough about machine learning and AI to come to this workshop, and connect those developers and those thought leaders to the practitioners that are ultimately going to be using these to make decisions. And there's kind of two sides of that. What do the developers need to learn from the stakeholders and the decision makers? And on the other side, what do the experts need to be doing to educate the users and potential users about what can be done with the technologies and how perhaps they should be asking questions a little bit differently, based on what they can do now that they couldn't do before. And kind of lead into to the next session, where do we need to be aware of issues? Where do we need to pump the brakes with respect to ethical considerations, reproducibility issues, et cetera? It's on that hype landscape. It's easy to get carried away, and I think one of the reasons that you end up in that depression after the excitement is over is because you're overpromising and you're not being realistic with yourself and with the community about where the limitations are. So I know that that's going to be a theme of the next discussion. And then lastly, and this will be the last session of the day, where are we ready to apply these tools today versus what needs some additional development? So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Elliott. Kevin Elliott is a philosopher of science at Michigan State University. He's done a lot of work looking at the intersection of societal values and issues of environmental health, so toxicity, air pollution, things like that. He's well positioned to be moderating a session on ethical considerations in the use of AI for decision making. So, Kevin.